So many technical details for this Zoom reality we live in. Okay, well, thank you for joining us, the panelists on this panel. That's part of the Memoryscape program, but also part of Rijeka in Flux project. We had planned a lot of live events throughout this year, but of course, we've had to change a lot of that, and it seems like it's getting even more and more difficult to make planning. But thank you for joining us here, and I really want to thank Francesca Rolandi for pushing and doing a lot of the organizational work in the last week or so, because I've been, as I said, in the process of moving. So thank you, Francesca, for coordinating and all these things and pushing me forward. So all the panelists, you all are engaged somehow in this, in public history, whether it's architecture or cultural studies or mapping or museums. And I think, having worked on this big exhibition recently, I see how challenging it is to prepare something for, let's say, public history that's much different than the classical historian's job of writing an article where you're doing a lot of the work by yourself in the archive and then writing on your own. This is, brings up a whole new series of challenges, especially for working in a city like Rijeka that has such a contested past, so many layers and levels to deal with. And just a small anecdote from this exhibition after the Great War, where I wrote one paragraph. I already had some people emailing me like, you didn't explain the history of Rijeka correctly. You know, in 5 sentences, I did not explain the history of Rijeka correctly. So for all of us, it's a big challenge, but I think there's a lot of reward for engaging in the kind of work that all of us do and all of you do. So that's sort of the direction I'm hoping that the conversation goes, and for the students to also think about where they might also work in the future, because we've got cultural studies students, historians, we have Erasmus students. So I think I'll begin with the round of the panelists. I'll just introduce each of you right before your moment to shine, let's say. So our first guest is Teja Perincic, who is from the Maritime Museum, Maritime History in the Museum of the Croatian Littoral in the Guvernerova Palača. She's, I'm next to a train station here, so I apologize. It's horrible. It's a horrible day. She, a curator, has worked on a number of exhibitions. She got her PhD in the University of Padua on Venetian rule in Dalmatia, but has also worked extensively on someone who's much closer to Rijeka, and that's Gabriele D'Annunzio, and had a big exhibition there last year. I believe it's still going on. So if you haven't had a chance to see the D'Annunzio exhibition in the museum, definitely go and check it out. So your work in the museum that you work in, its job is to communicate this very difficult and complex history to a broader audience, both local and international, and also for younger and older generations. So maybe you can discuss a little bit about that process. How, what are the challenges, what are the successes of telling this complex story to these diverse audiences, and especially Rijeka in the broader context of Southeastern Europe.
So hello to everybody. The first question is I don't know what to answer because I would take you to the governor's palace and then show you everything, and then you would understand the complexity of our work there. So if I just tell the story of the palace itself, you all already tackle a lot of layers of public history not only of the city of Rijeka, but also the wider region. So it's actually when it's a very difficult job, yes, when you have to communicate such a complex history and such a complex heritage. Also, we have. I wanted here to just to shorten the history of the palace for everybody who don't know about this history. Well, the palace was built in 1896. I'm sorry, I have a visitor here. My dog just entered into the conference. I'm sorry. Okay. So the palace was built in 1896, and it was supposed to be the residence for the Hungarian governor, because at that time Rijeka was Hungarian port. So then later, after the First World War, Gabriele the Nuncio was in that building for 16 months. The building was also bombed in the Bloody Christmas in 1920. And then, I'm sorry, my dog is disturbing me. I need to kick her out. So, and then after that, we have Italian government in Rijeka also being there in that building. And then after the Second World War, the building finally became a museum. So when you tell all this story, just at the beginning, when you enter in that building, the people are overwhelmed with the historical fact. And the other challenge for the curator or the one who is guiding a group of people is how to adapt that history for the different age groups. Because when you have small children who are 6 or 7 years old, they don't know any of these concepts, and you have to tell them what the palace was for, and they in somehow you have to make them understand that something very dramatically happened there. And that's a kind of challenge. And then you have visitors that are coming with for instance, you have Hungarian tourists who are interested in the Hungarian history of Rijeka. Then they want to know everything about the Hungarian part of that building or Rijeka. And then you have Italians. They have a lot of, especially in the last 2 years, they had a lot of expectations about the Nuncio and telling the story about the Nuncio in Rijeka and the governor's palace. And of course, you have a lot of local people. Local people want to know more about the local history. So everything is very challenging. And what Björn already said, you have to read a lot of things. You have to include a lot of experts, scientific papers, and then reduce that in small, interesting but truthful stories. And it's all by it's a kind of talent. When you see a group of people, then immediately you have to understand what kind of interest they would have, and then lead them through the permanent exhibition, telling that story. I don't know if I if I managed to answer to your question, but that's what it is actually, the job of curator in our museum. And when you are a historian, because we have some other departments, and of course they have a different kind of narration when they doing their guiding tours in the museum.
Thank you, Thea. Two very important things I think that you brought up in your introductory answer. And one is we see how Rijeka was this crossroads of so many empires, states, nations. And just the way you this anecdote of the Hungarians that come there, or the Italians, or whoever comes there also sees part of their own history in that museum in this city. And also, especially the students that are in the Southeast European Studies class are also learning about the various influences of these empires and the legacy of these empires as well. And I think Rijeka is a very fascinating place with so many layers to it. And the second one, you can tell not the entire history of Rijeka, but a lot through the history of one building. How many different stories one building will tell us. And that will take us to our next panelist, Kristina Panja, who has her master's in history and informatics, and she works at the Center for Industrial Heritage at the University of Rijeka as an expert advisor. And there's a lot of industrial heritage in Rijeka, and I've had the pleasure of being on a tour with her, and I know that she probably organizes many other tours around the city. And so really just walking through the space of the city, and that's one of the projects that Rijeka in Flux is also working on that. So I know Kristina is an expert in all of these buildings and all the various stories that they tell us. So I guess my first question, maybe you could tell us a little bit about your work, also as the trainings for the tourist guides and this project, Rijeka Heritage. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about that as well. Kristina.
Thank you very much. So hello to everyone. So the story about the center is it starts in 2013 as establishing the center, but the researching and dealing with industry and industrial heritage for me and my colleagues started when we were students. We were a part of the NGO Protorpedo. So this is the NGO that started in Rijeka maybe a little less than 25 years ago. And these are the people who started to research about the industry of the city from different approaches. So we have there historians, art historians, we have the people who are interested in naval history, we have the people who are dealing with who are engineers, who are researching that part of the industrial history, industrial heritage. So with the center, we just took that approach to the heritage. So we think that that multidisciplinary approach for dealing with that part of the history is really important. So we are when we are talking about industrial heritage, we try to impact two types of the heritage: tangible and intangible. When we are walking through the city, you see buildings, but those buildings are not just the buildings. So some work was there, I don't know, 20, 30, 100 years ago. Some people worked there. So the knowledge, some machines were there, some people were there. And when we are talking about the industrial heritage, all those things are really important when you're researching it. You mentioned the project Rijeka Heritage. So this was the project that was founded by the city of Rijeka. They wanted to make a web page of the industrial heritage of the city for the citizens. So that project was really nice to put in one place a good map of all industrial sites in the city, abandoned, used, and partly used. So with a short story about the building, and then with the literature you can try to find if you want to know something more. I think that is a good thing to impact that the city of Rijeka wanted to have that kind of web page, just to present their citizens what is the importance of industrial history and industrial heritage of the city. In history, Rijeka was really important industrial city, but I think that in I don't know 30 years ago, when we started to talk and research and publish and present importance of industrial history of the city, we started to talk about identity of the city. The second thing you mentioned is the education for the tour guides. We had, as a part of the project, it has a huge title, but the project is the renovation of the ship Seagull or Galeb, and renovation of the Sugar Palace in the complex Benčić. So the University of Rijeka is one of the partners in the project, and we had the soft activities for the project. One of it was the education for the tour guides of the city of Rijeka. We had 5 courses, so we presented some really important and really interesting courses about the things that are important for the people who are guiding tourists in our city, and we are very glad that a lot of people came to that courses.
Yeah. Thank you, Christina. And I think it's also interesting in this idea of tour guides. Of course, it's not just for tourists, although, you know, with Rijeka 2020, the goal was to bring in more and more people, and also the Rijeka Influx app that was being designed, but also for the local people to learn about their city. And again, I'm coming back to the complexity of Rijeka's past, but even though I'm, let's say, a historian in Rijeka, you know, to learn and try to figure out all the details about it and the little stories, you know, takes a lot of time. And so it's great to be able to take advantage of this story through the buildings, the architecture, and you really see parts of history that's far beyond just, let's say, political history, but daily life and the economics and all these things that move the city forward. And the tours, that's definitely one way to go about it. And now I'm going to our third panelist, a good friend of mine and colleague and partner in crime on many projects, who has attempted to also recreate this experience in this latest project, Fiume Fantastica. And this is Renato Stankovic, who's a graduate. He has his master's from the Cultural Studies Department, the University of Rijeka, and he's worked for a number of public institutions, City of Kastav, and organizations. He now works in the Delta Lab Center for Urban Transition. And as I mentioned, he has worked on this amazing exhibition, which if you haven't seen it yet, you should definitely go check it out at Export Drvo. So Renato, you're in Export Drvo now. You're standing behind, you're on the main street, it looks like, of a recreated image of Rijeka with its various buildings and various stories. So tell us a little bit about this, the idea behind this, and what you've created in this warehouse.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me on this panel. It's an honor, of course. So hi, everybody. Yeah, Fiume Fantastica, there's a story behind it, obviously. First of all, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this Delta Lab Center that you mentioned. So some time ago, I guess 2016, 2017, there was an idea connected to the project of the European Capital of Culture and its strategic partner, the University of Rijeka, basically to create a sort of a legacy of that partnership. So not just focus obviously on various cultural events or educational events or similar stuff, but to try to create some very firm legacy that can continue working on, you know, doing research, doing various production, doing the education as well, consultational work, for example, for some public institutions. And so Delta Lab was created. So its full name is the Center for Urban Transition, Architecture and Urbanism. But obviously, besides architecture and urbanism, which is most of the experts that we are dealing with, there are many disciplines involved. So you have obviously cultural studies, sociology, philosophy, art history, art as well. So you have all these various perspectives kind of concentrating within this hub, which is Delta Lab. And so our idea was basically, since obviously urban transition is something that should deal with the future of something, specifically the future of Rijeka in our case. But in order to kind of discuss the future, especially in a very complex and complicated city like Rijeka is, you need to understand its history and obviously what the identity of the city is. So before you get to talk about future, obviously you need to have these parts sorted out. So when discussing the identity of Rijeka and the history, or many histories of Rijeka, there are, you know, some narratives that are very popular. So you have stuff like, for example, Rijeka is an industrial city, or Rijeka is a rock city, whatever that means, or narratives surrounding Rijeka in public discussions are, for example, either very political, which is good sometimes, but sometimes it's maybe an obstruction. So you would say, you know, different regimes or different politicians or whatever, or it's very historical, like strictly historical, which is fine if you're into discipline or into history itself. Or you have this, for example, kind of a tourist image of the city, which obviously kind of shows you just, you know, the best portions of the city. And of course, there's been a huge influx of amateur communities, mostly concentrated on Facebook or different social networks that kind of show you very personal, either photographs or letters or various things. And so there was a problem that we faced at the beginning of our work is, you know, everything is so scattered, you don't really have a pretty good idea or a good image of what the city is. And so we decided to research it a little bit. We invited a lot of people, Vera and you were among them. And so what we found out is basically that there is no complete narrative that shows you or tells you the story of the city in a sort of a fantastic way, in a way that kind of helps you to think about the future in a different way than the official narratives tell you what the future should be, right? Because it seemed that, like, at some point there was a decision to be made, right? Is Rijeka going to be a post-industrial city focused on cultural tourism? Is it going to be a university city focused on education? Are there, you know, creative or cultural industries that we can bring into the city? Are we going to be, you know, what's the story going to be? And so what we did is this exhibition, Fiume Fantastica, which is basically the sort of a physical manifestation of the story of Rijeka that we thought the citizens of this city primarily should see. So it's a sort of a multi-layered approach. You have this architectural layer that obviously shows you very important buildings, very important urbanistic elements of Rijeka that obviously shaped its history and sort of becomes a resource for the future. You have this historical element, so, you know, the stories, the events, everything that kind of helped shape the city, you know, like borders or infrastructural elements or similar things. Then you have this cultural layer, which basically tells you a story about, you know, people in the city. And you have this, which is the most important part, this physical experience of being in a huge warehouse, which is called Export Drevo, or Export, a shortened version, which used to be a warehouse that stored wood for more than not more than a century itself, but basically the storage of wood is such an important story for Rijeka, this part of Rijeka, and this warehouse is a sort of a symbol of this old, I guess, port and industrial infrastructure that wants to become something more. At least that's what we felt. And so this is where we put the exhibition. So not in a museum, not in something that people would expect. We put it in probably the worst place, because it's very hard to do exhibitions like these, which are, you know, multimedial, big in the matters of square footage. So it's very high. It's very hard to, you know, keep it cool or warm or whatever. So it's also kind of an uneasy experience as well. But it helps our goal, which is basically to show that Rijeka obviously has a complex history, and some of the things are positive and negative. But when you want to talk about the future of the city, you have to take them into account. And it's very easy to you can't really expect people just looking at old photos on Facebook to understand the complete picture. In order to do it, you have to be physically somewhere. You have to feel on your body. You have to walk somewhere. You have to walk over obstacles. You have to touch. You have to hear. You have to see, in order to have this complete picture. And then you have all the elements that are necessary. At least that's my personal experience to discuss the future of the city. So we kind of took, I guess, these historical elements and told a whole different configuration, basically, which became a story of Rijeka called Fiume Fantastica. So I guess the goal was to say that Rijeka is a fantastic city, and also it gives some answers. And I've been living in the city for my whole life, and I've been to some other places as well. And I know a lot of people who came here, and you always have this feeling that everybody kind of understands there's something else going on here. You can't really pinpoint what it is, right? Sometimes it's architecture, sometimes it's, I guess, the general feeling, sometimes it's culture, sometimes it's, political leanings or whatever. But Fiume Fantastica, from my point of view, told this complete story. And so obviously helps, the citizens, but also to people maybe looking to Rijeka as a sort of a place to go to. So yeah, that's the short story.
Thank you, Renato. And again, you guys have done an amazing job there, and you do really feel it on your skin, as you said, and being in that warehouse. And even though I'd been also researching Rijeka's history for a while, seeing it through a new perspective, seeing it through, you can see that it's designed by maybe even by architects, and it's not just a classical historical experience that you might get, let's say, in the governor's palace, or maybe in the city museum, which will be opening its new permanent exhibit sometime shortly, as far as I've heard. So I think we've heard now three also approaches, whether it's the museum, some tours, this Exportdrvo warehouse, and we'll go to our fourth speaker, who's been battling possibly some corona-like symptoms, Brigitte Lenormand, who's an assistant professor at the Department of History at the University of British Columbia, Okanagan, in Western Canada there near Vancouver. She's worked a lot on urban planning in socialist Yugoslavia, has worked on, for example, Belgrade after World War II. I'll be asking maybe a little bit more about that later. And she is the principal investigator on this very exciting project many of us here have been part of or contributed to, and it's Rijeka in Flux, Borders and Urban Change After World War II. And bringing in a lot of, digital tools. So we've heard about this physical aspect of public history, and now with this project, Brigitte, you've really focused in on the digital. So maybe in this from interactive maps. I mean, we've heard from Christina that the Rijeka Heritage Project also had some mapping, but now we've taken it to the next level. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the project and your approach.
Sure. And hello, everyone. And I apologize if I start coughing or anything like that. On the plus side, this is probably the only talk you'll go to featuring a corona-infected guest that will not actually put your life in danger. So that's good. Excuse me. So essentially, we have been exploring the potential of maps, digital maps specifically, for several years now. These are experiments in engaging with publics in the exploration of the history of a complex and politically and culturally contested space. And part of the motivation is exactly what Renato was just talking about, this fact of the coexistence of multiple different narratives that don't actually ever come into conversation with one another. And so you end up with a kind of a fragmented memory of this place. and multiple groups entertaining sort of mutually exclusive understandings of the past of this place. And part of the reason for that is that there are many different possible narratives about Rijeka because of its long and complex history. But we wanted to explore the ability of maps to maybe rupture those kind of neat and self-enclosed narratives and help people to understand the multi-layered nature of the past of the city. And we did this in 2 phases. In a first phase, we were interested in how, from a very basic level, how maps can reveal spatial relationships and stories that aren't known yet, right? And we were also interested in how maps might be used as a means of crowdsourcing knowledge. So bringing in particular people's personal stories into the public sphere, right? And this first project was a web-based map, which you can, I'm gonna share the screen and just show it to you. It still exists, and you're invited to go check it out. It's at rijecafiume.geolive.ca. And as you can see, what it does is it invites people to come and put markers on a map and input information about different places, either with, any information really. It can be sort of historically known information about different places. It can be also personal family stories. And, each one of these is a marker. You can have audio visual material. You can have a short description, and then there are keywords associated with it. And you can search by keyword. You can also search by layer. So let's say you're only interested in, government and military, then you can turn off all the other layers and simply look at that. But perhaps you're interested in the relationship between commercial and industrial and residential. So then you can call up 2 different layers. So the idea is that this kind of map helped people to explore relationships and hopefully revealed new insights that we didn't already have. The next project, so that was 2014 to 2018. The next project was the creation of an augmented reality mobile phone app. And here the plan was a little bit different. It wasn't to crowdsource information. What we were interested here is how you could use technology to allow people to explore the city on their own terms. In other words, that they might be able to build narratives simply through their meanderings through the city by encountering objects, and that this embodied experience might help people to understand something about the city that they wouldn't by simply looking at a map, like a top-down kind of map. Let me just call up, this is a slideshow I made for another talk, but it gives you a little bit of a sense of what this experience is like. And I encourage you all to download this app and check it out for yourselves. I think it is currently going by Rijeka Fiume app. It's supposed to be called Rijeka Fiume in Flux, but anyway, you'll find it pretty easily. It has this logo over here on the right. And the idea is that the app offers people a way of engaging with markers that have been written by researchers. And they have a choice. They can either wander through the city and call up markers as they encounter them, or they can opt for a guided tour. So like on the top left hand here, you see tours. And yeah, so this gives you a sense of the different ways in which you can encounter the markers, either in a map view or in the augmented reality view. And if you go on the tours, one of the features is that different stories are told about the city, and some of them will even include the same markers. And so the notion again is that, every site in the city can be embedded in multiple different stories about the city. So the aim of this app really was to sort of democratize and make history more playful in a sense, and hopefully, enable people to experience the past in a way that isn't quite so kind of linear and sort of deterministic as the ways in which they may have so far encountered the history of the city. And it's also aimed at multiple different audiences. So, for example, we're hoping that school teachers visiting Rijeka will introduce young people, students to it. This is a great way to get young people interested in the past, if you can somehow gamify it in some way. But also we're hoping that, tourists might find this interesting, as well as locals, as a way of gaining a deeper knowledge of the past of their city. And one of the things that we would like to do also going forward is periodically have releases of new batches of markers along particular themes. So in this way, sort of enriching the number of possible narratives that that people can explore. One of the new themes we're going to launch soon is actually going to be discussed by one of the other speakers, their markers prepared by her team, Ana Ajduković, Women's Rijeka. So maybe I'll just stop here. It's a kind of a nice segue. Thank you.
Thank you, Brigitte, for joining us and again for battling the current health situation. Hopefully, our app won't put all these hardworking tour guides out of business. Just kidding. And I think all of our guests, all of our panelists work in different institutions, but they're so interactive, in fact. And I mean, to really understand it, you have to go to the museum, you have to go to the exhibition, you have to go on the tour, and so on. And our final panelist, Ana Ajduković, is another graduate from the Department of Cultural Studies, and currently also working with the Center for Women's Studies, also at the Filozofski Fakultet in Rijeka. She also works for the lesbian organization Rijeka Lori. And as Brigitte mentioned, you've also been involved in this app and have prepared one of the tours. And I think in the framework of the Smokva, is that?
Yes, that's correct.
Smokva, okay. I mean, it's like I've only seen it written. I've never. The Smokva Festival of Feminist and Queer Culture, and it's a feminist walk through Rijeka, and has been curated through this app. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about some of your work and the work on this app, and also allowing this part of history in the past and identity to become visible, which is maybe has been generally marginalized or invisible in Rijeka and in Croatia in general, and probably in many parts of the world.
Yeah, thank you, Vjeran, and thank you, Brigitte. It's really nice to see you after all these emails, you and Francesco, finally. So yes, I would use this introduction and just maybe give you a wider concept and how we even started with the idea that Rijeka needs this kind of initiatives, I would say, more than research projects in this content. So when we started to think about feminist walks in Rijeka, it was a year ago, because we done some basic research, walking around the city, collecting literature, talking with museums, and so on. And there was also one big research done by Ana Kuzmanić and Iva Perić. They are researchers from Zagreb, where they made research around 64 cities in Croatia, where they realized that there are 11 cities in Croatia not having even one street named by the woman or a square. And they're like less than 5% of street naming or street recognizing importance of contribution of our beloved
women, and also different groups and different identities in the city. So we had this kind of base and framework for our research here in Rijeka, where we realized that there is lack of representation of women in our city, even though Rijeka and their urban politics and people who are doing the politics into shaping the cities are very in favor of this kind of initiatives, because in 2017 and 2018 we already have a queer walk around Rijeka, also within the Smoka Festival, which is Festival of Queer and Feminist Culture, also one of the landmarkers in this specific field of visibility of different identities in the city where we live. Because when you're talking about gender perspective in shaping public spaces and shaping the city where you live, you always start by asking yourself, if you cannot recognize your identity in the city where you live, who that city belongs to. So if I cannot recognize history by walking around the city and identity of my own group, who I belong to. So this was one of our let's say idea that we wrapped by organizing a feminist walk. Of course, here was also one other concept that we found very important, maybe on something that Christina said, that locals can organize this kind of tours, and who has a right to represent the knowledge about the city. There is this concept, I don't know if you heard, it's like Jane walks. So Jane Jacob was a very important sociologist and urban activist in the 70s. And she had an idea that the local communities can contribute in the shaping their cities and neighbors let's say in contrast to this urban development and planning of big corporations building I don't know, cities around the needs of capital and profit. She was the one who said, no, the city belongs to the citizens who live there. So after her death in 2005, there has been this big activist, I would say, toolkit or tool that they developed. It's called Jane's Walk, and there is a big now wide platform that you can all check on the website. You can just write the Jane's Walk, and basically you can organize a tour, a guided tour through your city. If you're a local and you want to share your knowledge about your city, about your culture, about your history, free of charge. So it's like transmitting knowledge neighbor to a neighbor. So this was kind of our main value that we want to integrate it in our feminist walk around Rijeka. Of course, we proclaimed within the festival. It was just one of the festival activities that we had. So in shaping our tour, we had to be careful about the time. We didn't have more than 1 hour 1 hour time. And also we were framed about the how to say landmarkers in the city center. So we didn't want to go beyond that for this first feminist walk. So we shaped 7 locations that we imprinted in these locations name of important women who contribute to development of Rijeka, such as, for example, Ada Felice, that was very important architecture in Rijeka, that she rebuilt and helped to rebuild Rijeka after Second World War. So Corso is one of her very important projects, and it was the first shopping mall after the Second World War in Rijeka. And when we started to shape this feminist walk, I was surprised about how much of things I didn't know, even though I'm someone who is doing the research, even though I'm someone who is in this kind of topic. And there's been 30 participants on this first feminist walk. 7 women, they only heard about Radmila Matejic. So it's something very indicative when you think about lack of information and this who history belongs to and how we are shaping the public spaces and so on. So yes, this was just one of the initiative, and our idea was just to go a bit under the surface to have kind of our first approach to advocacy on changing the public sphere and urban politics on shaping cities in lack of representation of women, also different identities such as the LGBT community. But we did it like two years ago through this queer walk that was also a very important part, not just of the festival, but I would also say a part of culture in Rijeka. So yeah, I would stop here for now.
Thank you.
Yeah, if
Go
I can
ahead.
say to link to what Bridget said, we developed a map that we printed, of course, to have some kind of heritage. But we also, on your Vieran's support and Vanis Galesu's support, we talked, we mailed each other, and we contribute markers for Rijeka Fiume app, mobile app. So this was very important for us in a way that we can have some kind of, let's say, digital option and option that this stays as an organic part of our city where we are, because maybe this can be a guided tour once, twice, I don't know how many times, but once you have it on this kind of apps, which I think that is very good idea, not just idea, but the project and the value that it has, it was for us one of the very, very important part of this feminist walk as well.
Thank you, Anna. And we were actually going to have the launch of the app several weeks ago, and a lot of the students were also invited to it. But unfortunately, because it was the weather and the situation as it is constantly changing, we weren't able to do it. But perhaps in the spring we could work on a much bigger, more bombastic launching in Rijeka to include everyone or as many people as possible. So looking forward to that. And the Jane's Walks, it's a great a great concept, and I think also adds this entire mosaic of various ways of doing public history, from the official institutions down to bottom-up kind of local initiatives, and this partnering with the university at times, and NGOs and other kinds of institutions. So we'll do one more quick round, and then we'll see maybe there's some questions or comments or more suggestions, because I see there's a lot of participants here. But we'll go back to Thea, and actually her, I already mentioned this exhibition, Rijeka's Martyrs, sorry, D'Annunzio's Martyr, which was also a women's perspective on D'Annunzio and his period in Rijeka. And it was a very interesting time last year, the 100th anniversary. There was a different exhibition in Trieste, and there was some even interventions in front of the museum as a result of all these things. So, the D'Annunzio in a way is both unknown, but also very controversial, and still raises some passions 100 years after the event, and it attracted a lot of attention. So Thea, maybe tell us a little bit about, this exhibition and your particular approach to it.
Yeah, I have to admit that I can't see the moment this 100 years of D'Annunzio ends, because It has been a lot of pressure on me personally to explain first, well, why do we need to do such an exhibition in our building? And then why we did it in a way as we did. As I said before, the nuncio, when he arrived in Rijeka, that was logically, he went to the governor's palace, and he was there for 16. He lived there for 16 months. So I thought it would be a kind of it would be our duty to tell a bit of the history of that building and of the city for that 100 years of the Nuncio in Rijeka. And since 10 years ago, I had already an exhibition, which was very, I would say, ordinary exhibition where you just tell the story as it was in chronological order. I didn't want to repeat myself, and we wanted to point. I'm talking in plural because I had a very good collaboration with Anna Maria Milcic. She is a young art historian, and she actually wanted to contribute. I mean, it was her idea to do something from this female perspective on the whole D'Annunzio story. So we actually agreed that we will do something small, but something different. And yes, we kind of present Rijeka as the nuncio's mistress, as many of other women in his life. And then I said, I would say that it was quite difficult to visualize this kind of narration. It was we choose that we will just do we will present what we already have in our collections, but everything what is related to presenting Rijeka as a female figure, or maybe like countries like Italy or Austria-Hungary or Croatia as a female figure, and then to also to tell the story about women who were with D'Annunzio in Rijeka. And I think the most attractive object, which is very modest object actually, it's a diary that was left by a Rijeka citizen, female, I mean, Zora Blažić. She was a young girl at that time, D'Annunzio's time in Rijeka, and she wrote her diary, very ordinary diary, but very important for us. And most important is that she was actually Croatian, and she told the different kind of story that we usually don't meet in archival sources. Majority of the sources preserved in archive, especially in Italy, just making D'Annunzio great still now after 100 years, while this diary of Zora Blažić tell us how an ordinary Croatian girl suffered during this 16 months while D'Annunzio was in Rijeka. So that's basically what we did within our museum building. But something else what I wanted to say, we didn't have so much problem with the questions from local authorities, like from the city or the region, or they just agree with the concept of the exhibition. But I still have a lot of people who are questioning our approach to this topic of D'Annunzio. Recently, I met one woman from Zagreb, and she's a journalist, and she said, "I didn't like your exhibition because D'Annunzio was a great poet, and you didn't mention this in your exhibition. So it will be always something. And majority of Italians, they don't like the exhibition because they think that the exhibition presents the nuncio in a negative way. And majority of Croatian visitors of the exhibition think that exhibition presents the nuncio in in a positive way. So I think the exhibition is good because it makes people thinking about the nuncio, although they might not agree with my way or our way of presenting him. And as I said, I think this exhibition, it's small, but it's not so simple because it's very, you have to know a lot about Annunzio and the history of Rijeka, and then you can visit this exhibition. So if I guide you through this exhibition, although there are, it is not, it is in the spatial respect, it's quite small, but we can talk about Annunzio through this female perspective for 2 hours, maybe more. So again, it contributes to this complexity of Rijeka's history. And I end here with this.
Thank you, Tejana. Once again, congratulations on the and the co-curator on this exhibition, because it was, you know, you took a risk in this approach, and as you said, not everyone understands or will like it, but it's not a classic kind of exhibition, but makes you think about it. And I had the opportunity to go to the exhibitions in Trieste and also in Vittoriale, which tells a very pro-militaristic, pro-nationalist, very glorifying version of the Nuncio, and it's good that there are other aspects of it. So again, especially for those Erasmus students or other students in the class, if you haven't had a chance to go up to the Governor's Palace, it's a very interesting exhibition, and also Tea's book about the Nuncio in Rijeka, Rijeka or Death. Available now for a limited time only.
Yeah, I will just add that you have a lot of time to visit this exhibition, because we will have it until the end of March next year. So you have plenty of time to visit us.
Great. Okay, now on to Christina, another controversial part of Rijeka. I mean, we've already heard a few of the aspects that make Rijeka's history controversial for various groups, and this is the ship Galeb, mostly associated with Tito, and the effort to renovate the ship has created a lot of problems, debates in the city, in the media. It's generated a lot of pushback. Is Rijeka just celebrating this communist history? And maybe, Christina, you can tell us a little bit about that, because Galeb is definitely part of this industrial heritage as well, and the potential to put Rijeka on the map, but also, you know, causes some kind of resistance in the city itself.
Well, yes. So by the first predictions and the planning, the ship should already been done, and the museum should already be in. But the problems are huge, so it is more expensive, and the costs are higher than the predictions, and all other problems were in a way of the project. But it is a really complex thing to deal with that ship. But unfortunately, in our local in the city of Rijeka, the people who are not experts were a little louder than the people that should work with the ship. So I think the problem with the city of Rijeka, that experts like historians, art historians, curators, as the city museum will be the part of the ship, had needs to make a huge job, but they are quietly working and dealing with it. And some louder people are in some bigger shape here. So the thing with the ship is that it is 8 years old. It was built in 1938, so 82 years, and it has the museum is talking about the 4 lives of the ship. So it was a trading ship, it was a military ship, it was a school ship, and then a residential yacht of the Tito. And the 4th life will be the ship as a museum. It is really complex to deal with all that topics, but I really think that all the topics are really important. We are talking about the Tito's ship, and we are having some debates. Is good to spend that kind of money for renovation that ship? But we are not talking about importance of that period in history for the city of Rijeka. So in that period of its life, the Rijeka was much more important port that was today. Rijeka was developed much more than today. In such way, it was really important industrial city. So we have the ship as a symbol of some better days than today for the city of Rijeka, but also the symbol of that third political option in that times of the Cold War. That was a big thing to make it. Yeah. For now the ship is in shipyard Kraljevica. So the first phase of renovation is done, and so predictions are that in the summer next year the ship will be done. Yeah. So yeah, if you have any specific questions about the ship, if I know answer, I will answer to you.
Okay, sounds like a field trip next summer to the ship. But for now, we're going to have to go only to Fiume Fantastica and to visit Renato. And you mentioned, and we discussed a little bit some of the innovative approaches of this exhibition, because you're looking at it's also not chronological. It's also not just the standard kind of. It's not a history museum, but you're looking at architecture, daily life, and so on. So it's not only the themes, but the approach of this exhibition. You like a lot of interesting media approaches, and you took me through there. You showed me some of it, but maybe you could share. What are some of the cool gadgets and approaches the exhibition is using to try to get the public interested and to learn about the history. Maybe you could share a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, since we're not an institutions like a museum, or we're not sort of an organization that does productions like this, professionally, and we have to adhere to some standards. So we were very free to see what the format is going to be, and that was a pretty good position for us regarding to the themes that you just discussed with other panelists. So because what did we do? So we took 10 phenomena, which you can find in the city of Rijeka, which you can find in a lot of cities, but in the city of Rijeka, they are kind of intertwined and are concentrated and basically create this fantastical dimension within the city. So things like, monuments, things like borders, things like, the city itself, or the things like port or railway. So you have all these different phenomena that create these fantastic dimensions. So some of the things that I mentioned now, like borders or monuments or networks, for example, can be very divisive and can create a lot of discussions that can be, political, or they can be negative or positive, like the situation with Gallup, for example, or the Nuncio. So, I mean, tackling with the same themes, basically. Or Torpedo, for example. So what did we do? So we basically put the physical objects, the pavilions that are behind me, some you can see some of them, basically house the teams. So in some weird way, these pavilions are the primary source of information for the topic that you're dealing with. And so the content becomes secondary. I know it's a strange concept. I mean, it's obvious, it's not completely innovative. You can see exhibitions like this in like Venice Biennale or various, Biennale type spaces. But it allowed us to kind of freely arrange and to deal with these topics in the sense that you can see them in a different light, right? Because they're put out of context, they're put into some different context. And so going to your question, obviously these pavilions are important because they are physical. And then you use technology as a sort of another way of compensating and or emphasizing some of the things that you want the audience to understand. So for example, when you're looking at the old town, right? So the old town is something that Rijeka has. It looks very weird because it was bombarded heavily. It wasn't hygienic to live in the 20s or the 30s of the 20th century. So for a long time, it's been in a very, very difficult condition, right? And so for example, one of the architects, local architects, Igor Emili did, he basically reconstructed the city by combining, stuff like arches, which you can find in many Mediterranean cities, but then you upgrade it with some marble or some glass or whatever. Then you have this weird houses. And so you can obviously walk through the old town and then you can come to our exhibitions and then you can see old photos or hear some sounds or look at the videos. But what we also did is we created a video game because the video game is a much better media to tell you a story or various stories from the old town. So because the old town was in a state that it was, it allowed for some, various shady activities going on there. So it's very hard to tell it through text. It's very hard to tell it through photos. So we created a video game, and obviously a video game then becomes a product itself. It becomes something that goes beyond the exhibition and becomes something that can be used regardless of the exhibition itself. So the video game is basically it's sort of a third-person game. Or third-person view game. So you basically go through the old town in various phases, in various parts, and you will learn these stories by doing some small activities or some small tasks. The other example is, for example, the fantastic zones, which is, I think I can even show you here, right? So I'm just going to leave it here for a bit so you can understand what's going on. So we have this element, which is basically an ugly element from one of the old industrial areas of the paper factory. It's a 5-ton element. So it has graffiti all over it. It's rusty. You have moss growing over it. So, and it used to be a bunker from which you can basically shoot somebody because it was made for enclosing somebody with a gun, right? So it's a very, very negative part of the history, right? It doesn't have anything positive to it. It looks terrible. But then you put it in a new context, which is this film scene or a movie set. Basically, you can see it's already looks better, right? If it's in a museum, it's maybe some art thing, who knows? It looks good. But then what we did, we added a new layer. There's a mobile phone here, as you can see. It has an app on it. So what it does is basically it takes this real element of history, of Rijeka's, hard history, and it basically superimposes this, I guess, speculative future of Rijeka, right? So you have this paper factory that we, I don't know, you do some, futuristic things on it. It's an illustration, but that this is superimposed to it. So what you get is a sort of an idea of what the future of Rijeka can be or should be, right? You can't just ignore all the negative aspects and focus on this beautiful Instagram future, but you have to combine the two, right? So it's very easy to do it by having this very hard element. By the way, it's 5 tons, so it took like 20 people 3 or 4 ways of taking it from that area and putting it here in this warehouse, and then having this app produced that can create this feeling and understanding of one of the possible futures of the city. So these are some of the gimmicks that we used, and it allowed us to kind of play more with all those themes, not avoiding, obvious questions. Of course, if you're doing D'Annunzio, you're going to get questions from all sides, right? If you're doing Galeb, you're going to do questions from all sides. But for example, the example of Galeb is a very interesting one, because since it's so political, and since the discourse about Galeb is very important, and it's been, it's a very talked about subject, right, in the last couple of years in Rijeka. So, but what we did, which basically told the story of how, we took a model of the ship, put it here, and we said, okay, it's not just a ship, it's an sort of an instrument for neo-colonialism that Tito did, going to these African countries or Middle Eastern countries, that basically, what do? You take architects and you take the company CEOs of many of those companies work from Rijeka, and basically you take them on the ship, you go to these countries and basically sell the knowledge. It basically
Looks like we may have lost Renato there.
Produce, cities or units. Hi, I'm back. Are you
okay?
Kidding?
Okay.
Yeah, sure. Sorry. No, so basically, just to conclude, so obviously you can do a lot of the things in order to tell the story without going into these very difficult discussions. Not because we wanted to avoid the discussions, but we felt that these discussions need to happen in some other place and not here in this exhibition. That was not the point of the exhibition. So there are places for these discussions, and they should happen, and they're very important. But we kind of envision this as a sort of a step towards the future. And in this sense, you kind of want to, show all of these topics in a different way. Yeah, but also, since it's a different concept, we kind of also felt the need to do a typical timeline sort of structure of the history of the city, which I was a part of, and because if you're doing phenomena, various different phenomena, it's very hard to put them into context. So you need to have that layer. So we did a huge timeline, which is the length of this whole warehouse here, and basically the last 150 years of Rijeka's past. But we also did it in a different way. So it's not like a printed timeline. It's all these different flags of the countries that used to either rule over Rijeka or were a part of Rijeka's identity or were very important to Rijeka at some point. So even here you can do a twist, right? And thus you can switch the perspective to something that is divisive. And just by moving this perspective, you allow people to either hear more about something or to get more interested into something, and without being enclosed in this very difficult narratives or discourses about certain topics.
Well, I think, from the conversation from all the panelists, many of our topics are controversial and will create a reaction, oftentimes negative, from someone who's not happy about it, whether it's a particular point of history or some identity. But I think that's also what gives us the drive to continue to be working with these things and allows this creativity. So again, I think all of the panelists here are engaged in that kind of work. And Brigitte, you're based in Canada, but you've been working on Southeast European history and these cities. And so maybe you could tell us a little bit, compare your work on Belgrade to Rijeka. Why these cities? How was it easier in Belgrade to Rijeka? Give us maybe a little bit some background information about the dirty historical job of working in these places in the Balkans.
Well, so my research on Belgrade was as a part of my dissertation. And I was really, it was a very straightforward, history project. I was interested in how how the new socialist regime attempted to transform Belgrade into the image of a socialist city. And the bigger question I was trying to answer was, what makes a socialist city a socialist city? And so there I relied pretty much entirely on archival research, but also on publications and informal reports. So the sort of looking at the intersection of policy and debate in the architecture and urban planning world. And I was also really interested in how people appropriated space and how people responded to policies and the ways in which the city, in fact, ended up not exactly matching the ideas of the planners, and how, in fact, in this confrontation between the planners and what, and the population, both in terms of what people wanted and how just the evolution of Yugoslavia as an economy and as a society was sort of pushing back against some of these policies, what kind of city resulted. So that was my interest in Belgrade. One of the things that really struck me about Rijeka is the extent to which it didn't really seem to present, not at least in classical form, the characteristics that I noted in Belgrade. In particular, this attempt to build a large scale, new city that was supposed to look like a worker's paradise of sorts. Certainly in Rijeka, you have development of new housing towers, right? In fact, Natasha Yankovic, who's been working on this project, that's one of her major interests, is in the sort of this, what she calls a concrete utopia. But ultimately, what's interesting to me is that Rijeka also really strikes me as a really important city in socialist Yugoslavia. It was the most important port city. There was some very important industry located there. Thank you to Christina and her colleagues for bringing it to our attention. For example, the Treći Maj shipyard. And it's a city that developed a very strong identity as a socialist city. And in fact, Francesca Rolandi is looking at the role that migration from the other parts of Yugoslavia into the city, what role that kind of played into the constitution of a new identity. So I think, my interest in the Rijeka is, in a sense, there's two elements. There's the moving of the border after the Second World War, which resituated the city in a new geopolitical context. And then, in what way is Rijeka transformed into a socialist city? So, and when I'm talking about this is less, what the app is trying to accomplish than what my own sort of archival research into this city is about, because my own archival research, which I contribute to the app, focuses on the activities of the Jugolinija shipping line and the ways in which the port activities were critical in turning Rijeka into a really important city for Yugoslavia.
All right, yeah, so for the students and for the other guests who are following the presentation, the app is available on Androids, and I believe also for Apple phones as well. It's so Rijeka Fiume app at the Google Store. Definitely get it. Anna, you mentioned that the walking tour and the smoke festival was one way to look at this feminist side, but maybe you can talk a little bit more. What are some other ways to integrate this gender history into the history of the city and Southeast European studies more broadly? You work also with this the Center for Women's Studies. What are some other initiatives or projects that you've working on or you're planning on working on in the future?
Yeah, so I forgot to mention before that there are like these frames of the feminist walk is not something new that we invented and developed. All around Europe and Croatia also are these kind of feminist walks that's trying to rewrite the history and to talk more about this public cities and public history that is somehow neglected the big part of their own identity. So there is, for example, in Zagreb, anti-fascist walk that is representing women around the movement. And also there was a walk in Belgrade, there is a walk in Ljubljana. When we started to develop feminist work in Rijeka, we also realized that there is, for example, in Glasgow, when they started to contribute to the, let's say, gender perspective on the history and reshaping the urban identity of the city, they collaborated with the local museums, with the libraries. So that was kind of whole wide networking in trying to reshape the knowledge we have about the city and the history of city itself through the contribution of people who are in somehow neglected in representation. So maybe there is in archives or in libraries or in some kind of I don't know, other platforms and places where you can have an information about it, about the people who contribute in the developing and so on. But it was for us also very hard to gain the information, to collect it. And it is also something that we have to emphasize when we are talking about the importance of representing the diversity in Rijeka itself, because Rijeka is a port of diversity. Smoka was also part of Rijeka 2020 and program Kitchen. So in idea, when we are talking about this interdisciplinarity approach, about multiculturalism, diversity, there is also a thing that we want to say that we are people who represent ourselves like that. But when you go a bit further into trying to recollect important informations, it's something that is really lacking. So for us, the next step would be trying to collect more informations about women who contribute to development in Rijeka and their cultural heritage, education, and so on, to connect maybe with the libraries. What we did and what I think that is very important in this field is to put an emphasis on education, because also in our curriculum and in a higher education system in Croatia, topics that are focused on the gender, on women's rights, LGBT rights are really not very well integrated. And the center, what they did in the last year, it started a whole new subject in the Department of Culture Studies that is focused on gender, sexuality, identities. And it's offered to all students of the University of Rijeka who are on master studies. So it's kind of communist external subject. And we are trying to put the focus on the gender and the interdisciplinary approach to gender itself. So from this perspective of historian, sociologist, psychologist, and so on. So I think that from one hand, there should be integration of this kind of topics in a curriculum, in our schools, in our higher education system, but also there has to be initiatives in a collaboration with different institutions, different part of, I would say, having an experience and knowledge to collaborate together and to create these kind of initiatives, so on. And I would just say, if I know that there are not lots of time here, but when you said the Nuncio and Fiume Fantastica and Galeb as controversial subjects, when you say gender in public, it's totally controversial, and we all had to explain ourselves why we want to do it and why is this important. Of course, we have Rijeka is the only city that marks Ida Hobbit, the International Day fighting against homophobia and transphobia. So we have rainbow flags on Corso also as a mark of this day, and trying to be more visible in public. But this is the only city in Croatia that does that, and we still have to explain ourselves of importance and trying to establish gender in the focus of urban politics and cultural politics and so on. So yeah, I would finish here now.
Thank you, Anna. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think in all of the topics that we talked about today were definitely, again, controversial, but allows us who deal with it to find creative ways to discuss it and to create some kind of public dialogue about it. Again, and I think we've heard many innovative approaches from the traditional museum institution, but using new perspectives, to something like what we have in Export Drvo, or using digital tools that I think all of us are using and developing. Now, we don't have much time left, but is there a question that some of the someone watching would like to pose, or they could write a chat message? And this is any comments with our esteemed panelists? Well, I think all of us have had a chance to learn about very many ways to learn about Rijeka's history. You know, we've got the app, we've got the museum, the exhibition, we can go on walking tours. I think if there are no questions for the panelists, I've used all my questions up, unless anyone has a final comment they want to make. Esteemed panelists, any last comments from you?
Yeah, maybe if it's okay. I just wanted to say something that, yeah, I mean, all of the panelists here and all of the things that are being done within our respective institutions and organizations, or whether we are doing it on our own, it's obviously a very important element in understanding the city and how the city works. And so it's not just some niche thing that it's important to, you know, either historians or to various groups within the city. All of this is very important to the city itself and to the citizens and everybody who comes here. I think it's so important.
We were just about to get the answer to life itself, I think.
Understand who we are and where we come from, it becomes something, right? Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that I think it is important. I think the audience or the users understand that it's important. That's the feedback that we have been getting in this exhibition, because just the fact that it's something different, whether if it's an interesting technological tool or it's a different way of how we compose the content, it creates something within the mind of the end user, and so it allows them to I guess, sort of go over these imaginative borders of what the discourse is or what the city should be, right? Because who is creating those narratives? It's either politicians or the media, or, you know, various people with various agendas. So it's a very difficult situation to go further when you have all these competing things. And so I think it's very important to keep doing what we are doing, and for everybody here, the panelists and of course the students as well. I think that because they're the next phase of what we started, right?
Yeah, that's what I also wanted to say, Renato. Thank you for, you know, for the students to like also think about their next phase once they complete the university, and how there's so many different directions they can go with, and, you know, being creative, being innovative, being interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, and tackling a lot of these issues that I think are important. So again, Morris wrote a short message thanking everybody thanking the panelists for their comments. I also want to thank everybody again, to Francesca for doing a lot of work here in helping me organize this, to Luca, who is our technical support and enabling it to live stream, and to Rijeka 2020, who helped finance this and helped to organize it. So again, it would have been nicer to all be together in person, but this is the Zoom. Brigitte has a final comment.
I just wanted to say that I put the name of the app in the comments box, as well as the website of the map that we developed in the first phase. And yeah, we would be thrilled if you would engage with either one of those tools.
Okay, thanks to all the panelists. Hopefully we'll be seeing you at some point in not just the digital, but the physical, and have a great evening. And students, I'll send you a follow-up message in the next couple of days. So thanks once again, and see you next time.